Hello, everyone. I'm Frank Ford with the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research. I'd like to welcome you to the second in a series of housing and community development forums. The forums are sponsored by the Home Repair Resource Center, the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research, and the Greater Cleveland Reinvestment Coalition. Today's forum will be a discussion of the Cuyahoga County Housing Study that was released in July. The moderator for the forum is Keisha Allen, Executive Director of the Home Repair Resource Center. Before I turn it over to Keisha to introduce today's speakers, I just want to add a few things. First, the forum is being recorded, and you will receive a link to this after the forum. The next event in the series is Wednesday, November 19th, and the topic will be the City of Cleveland's Residents First Code Enforcement Initiative. And this will be followed by an annual housing conference on December 12th. In the coming weeks, we'll be sending out notices with more detail. So without any further delay, I'll turn it over to Keisha.
Thanks, Frank, and welcome everybody. Hope everybody's having a good afternoon. My name is Keisha Allen. Like Frank said, I'm the Executive Director at Home Repair Resource Center, and we are really excited to delve into this topic matter, the topic matter being housing matters. And earlier this year, Cuyahoga County released its findings of a comprehensive countywide housing study completed by the Levin College of Public Affairs and Education at Cleveland State University. This month's forum will begin with a presentation from Molly Schnook, the director at the Center for Economic Development at the Levin College of Public Affairs and Education. Molly led the study and will further discuss its recommendations and findings, followed by a panel discussion with our experts weighing in on how the county can use this study as a roadmap to addressing the housing needs throughout the region. So our panelists today are, like I said, Molly Schnook, Director at the Center of Economic Development at the Levin College of Public Affairs, Mike Billnitzner, Vice President at Benjamin Rose, also representing Livable Cuyahoga and the Council on Older Adults, Austin Cummings, Senior Research Associate at Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research, also representing VAPAC's Housing Affordability and Stability Working Group, and Anthony Tony Scott, Director of Housing and Community Development with Cuyahoga County. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Molly to share her presentation and findings from the study. So Molly, you're on.
Hello, everyone. Let's see if you can see my screen here. There we go. We will try this. How's that?
Click on from beginning. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Everyone see it?
You're good.
We're good. Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Molly Schnook. I am the Director of the Center for Economic Development here at Cleveland State, and long been engaged in housing and community development activities, discussions, and research. And so today I've been asked to present the work we did for the Cuyahoga County Department of Housing and Community Development, examining challenges and opportunities related to housing across the county. I'd like to start with this slide, kind of why housing. So this is a group of housing advocates, experts, and nonprofits involved in the housing space, but that's not necessarily true for communities across our country and our state in understanding the importance of housing and housing dynamics to regions. And so here's just a snapshot of some very recent, in the last year, headlines from various outlets related to the importance of housing and economic growth for their regions. And so when we talk about housing today, what we really want to focus on is the intersectionality of housing in Cuyahoga County and our broader region. And that comes into play, why is Cuyahoga County important more broadly than just to us, but thinking about our regional economic performance and the state. So the Cuyahoga County is a significant population center for the state of Ohio. There are a number of universities and, a large and rather diverse workforce. Within approximately a 45-minute commute, there are over 2 million people that could reach downtown. Our county is comprised of, as you know, 59 distinct communities that represent an array of different community types: large suburbs, smaller suburbs, ex-urban communities, and even villages. But Cuyahoga County represents significant economic importance to the state, with over with close to 40% of the GDP of the state coming from the county. So being home to both urban and suburban communities, there are a lot of CDCs in our community dealing with housing, and then thinking about our approach to this. So the center was tasked with examining existing housing programs and policies. Many of you may be aware that in 2016, Cuyahoga County engaged with the university to do a housing study. That study was predominantly data heavy, data focused. This time around, we were asked to look at more of the housing needs and challenges facing our communities. So we did provide a data update. That was the first phase of this work. Information and data collection around a number of different variables and data points, including demographics, housing demand, and affordability. The second phase focused on one-on-one stakeholder interviews. We conducted approximately 45 stakeholder interviews that were divided between community stakeholders as well as one-on-one interviews with leadership and staff from 12 county departments and programs. And then the final phase of our work, we deployed a survey to all of our 59 municipalities and communities across the county. It went to mayors, community, and economic development practitioners in those communities, and we had 27 responses to that. The first thing I'd like to look at for this is just kind of home values, irrespective of ownership type across the county. Home valuation, an increase in home sales pricing has been in the news since the pandemic, an explosion of home costs. So we wanted to take a look at the distribution of median home values across Cuyahoga County. And as you can see here from the shading, that there is a significant proportion of housing in our communities that is $150,000 or less. And in places like Lindale, East Cleveland, Maple Heights, and Newburgh Heights in the city of Cleveland, these communities with the lowest median home values in a region are below $90,000. And I think that speaks to a lot of what community groups have been looking at around smaller mortgage loans, values in around the $50,000 range or so, and the importance not just to the city of Cleveland, but to other communities, as well as the sort of opportunity that arises from this band of home value for LLCs and investor purchases. So you can see where here in later slides, you'll see some of the communities that may be more susceptible to that. In looking at home ownership rates by city, we also wanted to look by census tract here. So this is a side-by-side of a comparison to cities and census tracts. And what you can see is that there is significant variation across Cuyahoga County in terms of home ownership. So for the city of Cleveland and East Cleveland, where the lightest shading is, that corresponds to the lowest home owner occupied rates. And that is between 29% and 45.9%. So in those two communities, less than 50% of residents are homeowners. And that sharply contrasts with other communities in our county on the outer edges, where some neighborhoods can reach 100% homeownership rate. So the slide on the right, you can see that not as stark for the city of Cleveland. There are pockets of which there is greater home ownership, but it significantly contrasts with our suburban communities and more ex-urban communities. In terms of housing affordability, again, you can see that outer ring communities are less affordable for our residents, and this has significant implications for that first slide that we were talking about, the region's economic competitiveness and housing affordability is increasingly becoming a key issue, not just for the community development organizations, but also understanding in the economic development sphere how important affordable housing is for attraction of talent, retention of talent, for economic growth, for wealth building in all of our communities. And affordability, you will see through the rest of this presentation, is a thread that runs through everything related to housing that we discussed with stakeholders and community organizations. So looking at who might be first-time home buyers and primed communities for being first-time homeowner communities, we looked at first-time loans by city and again by census tract. So just looking citywide doesn't tell you that there are different dynamics in different neighborhoods and in smaller geographies. So as you can see here, the city of Cleveland doesn't, again, not significant home ownership, but you can see the distribution of first-time home buyers throughout the county. And as you move further out, these are generally more expensive homes, again, affordability, and these are usually second or third time mortgages, properties across our community. So in many places, these are people who have sold their first home, they're maybe in a ring suburb bungalow and moved further out. Renting is also an issue that was brought up to us in many of the stakeholder interviews. So we wanted to examine rental burden and looking at gross median rent across Cuyahoga County. And again, you can see here that the lighter shading indicates more affordable rents given HUD's affordability measures. That doesn't necessarily mean we did not examine this in conjunction to earnings or employment, but this is what should be affordable in our county. And as you can see in moving out, places for rent become more and more affordable the further you get away from Cleveland. Now, age of our housing stock was something that was brought up to us by the county in wanting to understand the distribution of built homes across the county. So our built housing stock. And as you can see here, and this is a little misleading, but I'll give you a hint in a moment here. So properties constructed pre-1950 are considered, right, your aging housing stock. But in the communities I've listed below, those percentages are actually of properties built prior to 1939. So if older homes are considered to be pre-1950, across these 5 communities, you have 50% or higher in Lakewood, approaching 60% of properties were built pre-World War II, right? So 1939. That is a significant age burden in these communities that are not necessarily faced by everyone, but I will also say that there is only one community, Glen Willow, in our county, where there are median age of housing was in 2000. So across all of Cuyahoga County, we are an older built community. And this was an issue in all of our interviews that stakeholders and survey respondents indicated to us was placed significant pressure on both economic growth and attracting new residents to their communities. Other housing challenges, again, going back to the LLC and investor-owned properties. So I apologize if the two tables are difficult to read and a little blurry. I had to shrink them down with 59 communities. But you can see across the whole of Cuyahoga County where we could identify LLC ownership. There are over 32,000 properties that are owned by investors. So, and this is a rather conservative estimate and distribution. There is almost no community, as you can see here, that doesn't have an investor-owned property, even in communities with some smaller numbers. So all of our communities are experiencing this dynamic, some more than others. The city of Cleveland making up a significant proportion of that with over 15,000 properties owned by LLCs. The key themes that came out of both of the data and interview process included affordability as the leading theme, aging housing, but also our aging population mirrors our aging housing stock, the need for increased advocacy around housing, increasing support for and implementation of lead-safe programs, housing rehabilitation, and addressing issues related to rental properties across our county. So thinking about affordability, we specifically asked respondents in our interviews to identify for us their definition of affordability. So what does affordability mean in Cuyahoga County? And though there are definitions, economic definitions around affordability, percent of income, 30% of your income, what respondents indicated to us was that affordability was a much broader issue and was related to quality and accessibility of safe, well-maintained housing. And there were also significant respondents who said to us that housing needed to be a broader human rights framework within our county, that everyone should be housed. Interview respondents shared with us that though Cuyahoga County is affordable in some places, it's losing its ability to maintain adequate housing that will remain affordable to most. This means that affordability is really spotty across our county and indicates that there should be a focus within the county on preserving what remains in affordable housing. So here you can see some quotes from some of our interview responses. That so one, housing costs are affordable for people living in markets outside of the state. This was really in response to a lot of what happened during the pandemic, that people moving into other communities. So sure, if you're coming in from, Illinois or New York, Cleveland seems very affordable, but that doesn't mean that it's affordable for people who are from Cleveland or from Cuyahoga County. Additionally, this also goes beyond just what it means to purchase a home. So it was pointed out that the cost of a starter home might be $200,000, but if you're in a 90-year-old home, there's going to be significant other costs to maintaining that property and continuing your home ownership. And so it's beyond just what mortgage and taxes are. And then again, the challenge with affordability in housing is that there are also large amounts of cash needed to build affordable housing that don't seem to be coming into Cuyahoga County. Aging housing stock, again, aging continues to be a significant pressure. This contributes to the affordability issue, and we have seen significant responses related to the need to maintain our aging housing stock, and that there should be additional dollars and programmatic supports to help bring our housing up into what people identified as maintaining livable conditions. aging population contribute to this as well. Many people want to age in place, and they simply can't do that with older homes. So there aren't first floor bathrooms. There aren't wide enough hallways. It's not disability accessible. You have porches that need repair and stairways for entrances that older people can't maintain. And so it really impacts actually the proportion of our aging population and where they live, and the distribution of our aging housing stock. So I listed our recommendations here, and I am not going to go into each of these because our other panelists and respondents will be discussing these, but I listed what our primary recommendations out of both the interviews, survey, and data were. So if you would like to view the full report, here is a giant QR code that you can link to and read. And then I know that we are going to be going into our other panelists and answering questions.
Thank you, Molly. Great presentation, great work that CSU did. And like I said, I think as stakeholders and folks in this ecosystem understand that, this is a study, right? We understand that it's a study. It will hopefully serve as a roadmap. It will hopefully serve as a guide as to what the county does to address the housing needs in Cuyahoga County. So Molly, just for a quick note, when was the last time the county completed or did a study, and how far back was that?
I believe that was the 2016 county housing study that we conducted. And as I said early on, that was data heavy. This is a departure from that in examining kind of on the ground grassroots responses to what the challenges and needs are across our communities. And as you said, it's sort of a roadmap. This is not a housing plan. Mm-hmm. This can help inform a housing plan. It was really meant to, I'm going to maybe put Tony on the spot here. It was really meant to assist as the department was evolving and transitioning under new leadership as what direction the county should take.
Great. And from that, I'd like to kind of jump into a discussion with our panelists. And I'll kind of lay out what I'll ask the panelists to kind of respond to. But Molly, at the end of her presentation, listed some recommendations that were found from the study, and our panelists have taken a look at those. And I would like to point this first question to the panelists directly to Director Scott, and talking about, of the 9 recommendations from the study, which ones do you find to be tangible to accomplish in the short term, and any others that you see that could be achieved soon using the existing resources that the county has?
Right. Thank you for the question, Takesha. Thank you for having me. Thank you to my esteemed colleagues and everybody that took time out to be on the panel today. As to the recommendations, if you know me, you'll know me to be a very candid and transparent person. So I'm just going to go straight to that. The funding. This study is invaluable to me because now I can move past just conversations, not just narratives. I have what's in my hand, quantitative and qualitative data and recommendations to share with the administration, with county council, with the municipalities, as well as to the philanthropic and banking industry that we all need to weigh in on this. So funding is my immediate priority. I've already been in rooms with quite a few people on this call, some in the panel as well, and will continue because I don't believe that it's something that I have the innate knowledge to solve automatically. Otherwise, many people smarter than me would have already addressed this issue. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that one of the strengths I bring to this role is building, maintaining relationships. And so to that extent, that's going to go into the networking, the leveraging the existing nonprofits, CDCs, the stakeholders, right? The people who really want to see this work. What I've been able to appreciate in these last 75 days that I've been in this role is a lot of people are doing well-intended work, but they're not collaborating. They're not all in the same room. And so we're recreating data sets that already exist. We are our resources, as limited as they are already disparate because they're going in different directions. And there's duplication of effort and maybe not as streamlined of policies and procedures, SOP, excuse me, and just practices. So leveraging that network and trying to do a better job of us all speaking to each other in order to accomplish these goals is quite important to me. Looking at my notes, I saw about housing counseling. Housing counseling is invaluable. Obviously, we have relationships with third parties, but something that the treasurer's office, Cuyahoga County Treasurer's Office, doing is on the first floor of the county building. They're developing a resource center, which they're going to have HUD certified financial counselors in there as well. So all of these things are invaluable. For me, cutting ahead, I saw a question. I'm gonna try not to monopolize this, but you gave me the mic first before the people come on. What's the priority for me as we talk about affordability, right? It's nebulous. Affordable to me and anyone else on this call may look different. So it's trying to find some way in which we can be more equitable, not equal, equitable in the distribution of resources and opportunities. Not everyone's going to be a homeowner. Not everyone's going to be a homeowner when they start. Not everyone is going to want to age in place where they are, but you still want to create as many of those opportunities. You want to create opportunities. And I'm speaking very naively as less than 90 days, but you want to be in a position to try to create equitable opportunities for the most vulnerable amongst us. Those who don't earn a living wage, those who need more than 80% AMI assistance, but that need the 80 to 120, those who need rental assistance. All of those are things, repair and rehab for these homes that are aging. So what my naive aspiration, but one that you'll hear more about in coming months, is to really key up some funding opportunities for those that are not just in the 80 and below position. I want to create opportunities above that. And that's what prayerfully myself, all of us as a network, the administration, council, banking, and philanthropic communities can all get in lockstep and try to create those opportunities.
Thank you, Director Scott. That was great. We all know kind of the newness of you being in this position, but it's been very very great to see you be as engaged as you are and being kind of a sponge with all this information to kind of produce it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Austin. Now, as I mentioned in my introduction, Austin is a senior research advocate or associate at the Fair Housing Center. But for the purposes of today's panel, Austin is a co-chair of one of the working groups from the Vacant Abandoned Property Action Council, also known as VAPAC. And they were tasked through VAPAC to kind of look at the study and weigh in on some of the recommendations that were provided. And if you could, Austin, the same question: what do you think is tangible and some ideas around the recommendations from the study?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me on the panel. I'm really humbled to be on it with you and considered an expert in this field. And yeah, so thank you very much. And thanks to all of the folks who have helped, streamline some thoughts in this process. I think there's a few ways I want to respond. First is, using the analogy of a roadmap, as this is a roadmap of creating a plan. I think this is a partial roadmap. There are some gaps in the report that would need to be filled to fully address the housing needs in the area in order to adequately create a plan that substantively, effectively, and I think robustly addresses the needs for the housing needs and intersecting housing needs here. And I think that will come up later as we speak. I want to kind of flip the question a little bit here and use my, thinking about, if we're going, we can like create recommendations or thoughts about, or even creating a plan based on resources we have versus the needs that exist. And I would really like to focus on what are the needs that exist and develop. And that's what I hear you also saying, Director Scott, is like, let's think about the needs that exist and work from there. And I think this is one of the inherent tensions right now that the county is also facing, given some of its other facing some other fiscal restraints, and also the federal government rescinding some funding or seeing ARPA dollars go away. But I think that starting from need is the first place, and that's like, that this is sort of a needs assessment that can be grown on to build a plan together with a robust public engagement process, focusing on the voices of those most impacted by the variety of housing crisis that we have in the county is one of the first things that would start, and making sure that there's a budget for Director Scott and for doing housing and community development work from the county is like essential, key, and important, with a really clear mission statement, set of goals that like are there, and really clear, tangible ways of measuring those and creating accountability for when things are going to get done. I think that is one of the first things that like we really stand behind. VAPAC, we're going to be releasing a letter that will be publicly available pretty soon with our full comments. But I think one of the first things that really stands out to me, that is really tangible and also probably doesn't use very much resource in general, is really thinking about, creating model legislation that can be pushed and advocated for. And, some of those could include or strongly, to address kind of affordable housing in both the multi-unit rental space and also in creating, more single home ownership opportunities. I think, the county should work towards developing a tenant bill of rights that emulates the National Tenant Bill of Rights constructed by the National Housing Law Project. When I was interviewed for this study, I heavily recommended that multiple times, and really feel like that's a place to really start from. The county could also really consider some of the other of the housing justice plan that exists already, that wasn't mentioned in this study. But it does exist, with a set of goals for expanding kind of protected classes under the county's anti-discrimination ordinances. I mean, that could include fair chance housing legislation and include source of income protections. We know those are in dire need. And underlying all of the graphs that were presented earlier here are issues around segregation, economic inequality, and persistent racialized poverty. Those need to be front and center in creating any form of plan going forward, but like are not mentioned in this kind of study, but it's underlying, it's structuring all of the inequality that's presented. We can think about developing legislation that expands housing security through passing longer periods to increase, for any adverse action on a lease, or developing just cause eviction ordinances that hopefully help to shore up and protect the most vulnerable in some of the worst times that they can experience. And also, developing a set of legislation that ensures that maybe unclaimed funds can be used to create future affordable housing in the area. We've seen unclaimed funds pulled away to create a second home for the Browns, when we could be thinking, right, they get two homes. There's plenty of people here who don't even get to become a homeowner once. And we like, let's think about that very deeply. Like, we are creating multiple homes for a business organization and a set of people who have a lot of money already, while we're letting those who are in the most need and experiencing a lot of other kind of financial strife and just other inequalities to go without. So that could be kind of an interesting way of moving things forward. I think that there's a way to explore other zoning legislation that increases the availability of affordable homes and incentivizes transit-oriented development in the region. And thinking about how do we really start to like through these model legislation also, I think, shore up and coordinate the data collection efforts across municipal courts so that we can better understand the geography, landscape, and impacts of eviction, and what the political economy of eviction is looking like too. So we can really start to ensure that there's greater housing security. I think those are two areas that are in many ways low-hanging fruit, or like at least done without a ton of resources. But I do think that fundamentally, going back to that first point I was trying to make, is that we need to start from a place of need and develop a bet, build on this study by addressing some of the gaps in it. Particularly a greater emphasis on what housing cost burden looks like for renters in particular. What's that relationship between housing cost burden in the rental sphere and the home ownership sphere? And also really deeply thinking about that relationship between there's a huge gap between affordable housing that is also accessible to folks with disabilities that are also aging in place, especially in the multi-unit apartment rental sphere. And that is like not addressed and like deeply kind of understood yet. But I think the work that I've done at the Fair Housing Center illustrates that this is one of the greatest needs in the region. It's one of the things that we get most calls about. And like, I think that there's a chance to really build on some of that. And I imagine, Mike, at Benjamin Rose, this is also a really big concern of yours.
Yeah, and this is a perfect transition. And like I introduced Mike Billensner in talking about his vantage point being the vice president at Benjamin Rose, as also the co-chair of Liverpool Cuyahoga and the Council on Older Adults. I'm not sure if your response, Mike, would be about aging, but what the question that was posed in regards to what do you find to be tangible. I would imagine it would come from that perspective. So thank you and appreciate you sharing your thoughts.
I appreciate you, Keisha, and I appreciate the Greater Cleveland Reinvestment Coalition for pulling this together. I am, like Tony, humbled to be on a panel with colleagues such as all of you. I know some of you, we have worked together since the foreclosure crisis, so we've got a wealth of experience here. In terms of older adults, maybe I'll start with a practical example of something that we created because of what Tony and Austin shared. And I'm going to respond. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to respond also to my recommendations. In 2019, we started seeing in Shaker Heights clients who were retiring to a fixed income, and they may not have even had a mortgage, right? They may outright own their home, but when they retired to a fixed income, property taxes, the cost of living, they couldn't maintain that home, right? So, or they physically, to Molly's points, they couldn't physically maintain their homes. And so they had to understand their options. So we created a workshop called Aging in Place, Know Your Housing Options. And that's been helpful. That's the kind of thing that I think we need for older adults, which empowers them and gives them resources. Tying it into the recommendations, though, if I were to highlight the first, what my takeaways from the first question and the studies, Keisha, we have tremendous resources here, expertise and knowledge around housing. It's been a perpetual issue for us for a while, probably since the crisis, if not before. So we have all learned our lessons, I think, some in common and some specialized, like Benjamin Rose or Keisha, if you're talking about home repairs and modifications. So I think the first recommendation is, how do we pull, as Tony said, the disparate resources that we have around housing together and build more synergy, build more power so we can mobilize quickly and speak with one voice? The city-county dynamic might confound that a little bit, but I think with we have a number of HUD approved housing counseling agencies and a number of HUD certified counselors. And I think it's really, it's division of labor, right? It's getting together and first of all, getting a vision of what we want housing to be. And then I think it's critical that somebody leads that there's an accountability point of one person, and hopefully endorsed by those in power locally, by the county executive and the mayor together, that there is going to be a housing plan, and there does need to be a housing plan based on what CSU and Molly has provided us. The other thing that I think that we really need to develop, and I think this is happening too, but it's also happening in a kind of a disparate way, is we really need to put a concerted effort into advocacy around housing. Just listening to Molly talk a week or so ago in a meeting, and listening to Tony and Austin, this issue of affordability is much more holistic and needs a new definition than the one that HUD provides, or the national industry standards of 30% of income. Look at, if you're a homeowner, look at the true costs of what you have to pay to be a homeowner. So I think that's where I would start. I would start with, we need to bring our resources together in some way and stay in touch. I can't tell you, I think I'm on 4 or 5 housing coalitions, and they've all made it a priority to do an inventory of the services we have. Well, they're doing it separately. So how do we communicate? Think about the repositories we have in community. United Way, we have DSAS, we have the City of Cleveland Department of Aging, we have all of the HUD approved housing counseling agencies. So I think there needs to be better communication in response to things like this survey and what our action plan is going to be. But ultimately, I would boil it down to this, including the older adult issue. In my opinion, we need a housing czar, and we need a housing plan.
Thank you, Mike. That's great. And kind of to piggyback off this conversation about kind of the recommendations, I think we all see where there's an intersection where funding comes together with collaboration, comes together with actual pragmatic, programmatic ideals. So I think we're all on the same page there, and I'm sure the county will hopefully, use the study as that. And to one of the questions that kind of got in the chat already, I don't know if we've actually had a plan versus had multiple studies. I've been in this field for 13 years now, and have only seen studies. So I think we tried to do it when we had some former colleagues at the county who have moved on to other organizations. So I think, like Austin mentioned, this is a roadmap, but it's also an incomplete roadmap that stakeholders such as ourselves can be a part of it and try to have what Mike was talking about, a unified voice and getting actual things done. So kind of like posing the question to the panelists, and Molly, you began to touch on this a little bit in your presentation, and talking about how researchers and practitioners talk about a paradigm shift, right? And how we describe housing. Economic development and community development have pretty much merged, and one cannot really exist without the other. And it's critical in our ecosystem to recognize housing as a form of infrastructure, which is essential for community well-being. So failing to maintain a home can degrade neighborhoods that we talked about, put them in disrepair, and also can reduce tax revenue, right? We still need to talk about money. So can you talk about how housing infrastructure is key to housing stability and economic health? And we can kind of have a little bit of a discussion around that. And panelists, feel free to jump in as Molly wraps up.
Sure. So yes, I have for a number of years been saying that I believe that we need to examine the lens of housing also as infrastructure. So many will remember during the foreclosure crisis and a lot of the supports that were deployed in communities across the country were, keeping homeowners out of foreclosure and rescuing homeowners. And there was a lot of pushback to that. People kept saying, "Oh, you're saving somebody who, didn't manage their money well or wasn't, doing well financially." And it was viewed as an individual sort of right or access. And absolutely true in the sense that I believe everybody should be housed. There is also an argument to be made for communities that housing is a built asset and is infrastructure. So as I often say, a homeowner with, I have a 30-year mortgage, whether or not I live in that house for 30 years, that property stays if I move. All right, that is a physical structure that stays in that community that is used for, that is taxed for school purposes, and you also run infrastructure up to that. So cities maintain streets because people live on them, and all of the utilities that are run up to them, irrespective of who is in that property. And when that property degrades, that means less tax revenue for a community. That means less ability to potentially resell that house to another homeowner. And as we've seen since the foreclosure crisis, a number of properties across our county have been demolished as a result of that. And so it actually is an economic hit for communities as well. And as much as, you talk about, we talk about things like stadiums, a new waterfront, you talk about, roadways and interchanges, maintaining housing is just as important to the breadth of what our community is and infrastructure. I do also want to say, going back to some of the comments, not just made by the panelists, but that I saw popping up in sort of the comment section. So it's absolutely true that there are dynamics to home ownership that are not included in the definition of affordability. And a re-examination of that definition is needed. And it is not simply just because you're thinking about people who are aging, and affordability is a different issue related to, maybe they're on fixed income. Some of the things that we often see and have talked about are, it is more expensive to maintain a property based on what commercial dynamics have changed. So I often use the analogy of my grandmother had this gigantic, tank-like refrigerator in her house in Cleveland Heights when I was growing up. And somewhere I guarantee you that refrigerator is still running, right? It was built for 100 years. I guarantee you it is. I have a refrigerator in my garage that was built in the 1970s. Let's just use that, right? An extra refrigerator. And we went to buy a new one, very expensive. And I mentioned it to the salesman, and he said, "Oh no, you can't do that with this one. It'll die in a year," right? So the quality of the products that we get to put in our home, you have to replace appliances 7 to 10 years. Whereas when you bought a home in the 1950s, all of the appliances you purchased would probably outlive you. And that is a cost to homeowners. Somebody asked about HVAC and other things in terms of rehabilitation and home improvement for people as well, right? None of that is included in calculating the affordable cost of a property for somebody. And yet that is a real cost once you get in that house. And so those are all of the things that also affordability misses. And I think we also kind of need a sort of sliding scale of affordability, right? As you age, your potential for, just even thinking of myself as I age, right? Your medical costs increase as, other things potentially could, right? So the balance of what you're paying in other areas of your life and what gets devoted to, what aspect. And yet we have this very sort of fixed housing cost. So I think that, we have to start considering other dynamics and what it means to be affordable.
Great. And Director Scott, when you talk about, you were coming into a position that was recently created, being that Sarah Parks Jackson, great person in this field who has led us and collaborated with us for so long. And so To the question as well, housing and community development have merged, right? Now in creating this office. Can you talk a little bit more about how community develop or how housing folds into infrastructure and how you see that unfolding? You're muted, Director Scott.
Sorry about that. I have a theory, not the most sophisticated, but it works. It's simply that community development, if you have a sound, robust, engaging community development plan, economic development is sure to follow. I think Mike and I had this conversation last time we were together. You put a solid structure in place where you have housing, where people can actually live and thrive. Then they have to work. They have schools. They need grocery stores. It's a community. Economic development follows. Conversely, you can build a robust economic development system, and community development may not innately develop. It may not organically develop. You have to create it. Meaning, because you could keep it as largely a hub of growth, of technology, of business, and then people commute to other communities. So for that reason, the way I think of it, they are kind of disparate, but they need to be together. So again, this department was created 2 years ago as far as an actual separate department, but they were all interconnected previously. My predecessor, Sarah Parks Jackson, worked with Paul Erdick and Vaughn Johnson as the kind of the hub, if you would, of the development cluster. But then the administration, the needs of the community required that it be separate. So my push, my passion is creating these opportunities that may not have been considered. I've seen some of the chats talking about housing maintenance. Yes, I was at community development and building and housing in the city of Cleveland. We don't have enough resources just within the federal structure to be able to provide all these opportunities. That's why somewhere someone created these standards of 80% AMI, but that's not the reality of where we are anymore. Every one of us on this call, unless you just have a really solid investment structure or separate business, you're 1 or 2 checks short of being in that 80 AMI, not for the perpetuity of your career, but any given time. Illness happens, accidents happen. The federal government is on a shutdown right now. People are not working. So we have to be more flexible. I forget who said it earlier. We have to be more pliable. We can't just exist off of what we get from the existing governmental structures. We really have to be more creative, develop more ingenuity, talk to our counterparts all across other nations, not other nations, but across other states, and see what they're doing to try to be responsive to this and try to bring some of those new ideas, those new collaborations, those new partnerships here so that we can expand our infrastructure and not just figure out how to stay afloat. So that's where all these kind of conversations, I'm glad we're having them. We have the data, we have the pragmatic, we have the programmatic. So now we just have to pull all that together. I couldn't help when Mike mentioned he was on 4 different coalitions that were doing all the same work. And I'm sure they're doing great work, but that's my point. One of them can do this, one can do this, one can do that. Instead of us all bumping our head, getting into fiefdoms or pissing contests, let's all get together and figure out how to do it and not just rely on the existing structures that we have because they're broken.
That's great. That's great. A lot of what you're talking about, Director Scott, is talking about collaboration and actually using the resources that we have today. And I think that's kind of one of the goals of today's forum is to kind of have that at the front of our ecosystem's mind, so we can stop talking about it and be about it, right? As people say. And Austin, can you chime in a little bit about what you think about the infrastructure? I think your point of view is very important.
Yeah, I think the infrastructure and kind of ties into thinking about housing through some new paradigms for sure. that question of like what is housing is at the center of it in a lot of respects. I think housing can mean a myriad of things to people. It can mean jobs. It can be a place of speculative investment. It can be a place of exploitation. It can be a place of respite. It can be a place where people actually find home. And one of the things that is central to thinking about what a house is or what housing is as an infrastructure is like we can think about that infrastructure as about a home or a piece of real estate. And fundamentally, if we're really considering affordability at its foundation, we really need to prioritize housing as a home, not housing as a piece of real estate investment that creates profit or is profit oriented or is just about a tax base growing or just about we have to really center that's a central conflict of what housing is. There's an inherent paradox of seeing the place you live as an investment sometimes, or that other people, I'm a renter. Where I live is a speculative investment. It is fundamentally that first. When we're talking about affordability, especially in Cuyahoga County, and we're not prioritizing thinking about the infrastructure of supporting folks that are renters first, we're also obfuscating a really big and central part of like a racial justice approach. The majority of renters here are working class, lower income, and often African American or Latinx. So like we really need to, I think, going back to that sort of idea of affordability and measuring it, like maybe thinking about it from a residual income approach would be really important. It would complement the 30% income housing standard. What I mean by that is like looking at what people have left in their pocket after they pay for rent, utilities, healthcare, their bills, and going like, is that even enough to even start to save for themselves? Enough to save for their child's future? Is it even enough to cover groceries? Is it even enough to start to save for a house if they want to become homeowners? I think what's also, if we're going to talk about community development in the United States, it has taken a lot of ebbs and flows as a paradigm. Collaboration is great, but sometimes advocacy and advocacy oriented stuff has to have friction, because friction it can generate movement. And I really think that like in an advocacy sphere, and as somebody who's an advocate, I think it's okay to have productive friction amongst folks who are trying to collaborate, to come to the table and start to really question the political economy of how housing and the distribution of housing outcomes, especially the distribution of negative housing outcomes, right? The negative housing outcomes are disproportionately borne by people and communities of color, and disproportionately borne by working class folks, and like we're really going to miss the boat if we don't think about that distributive aspect of how that infrastructure works, because infrastructure in different parts of this county looks very differently.
Absolutely.
And we have to really think about if housing is an infrastructure, it should be an infrastructure for enabling. We need to ask ourselves, what sort of life is enabled by this housing infrastructure? What sort of life is enabled in different places where that infrastructure is unevenly distributed and unevenly supported? From the rehab standpoint, at the Fair Housing Center, I did an analysis of where home repair loans went from 2019 to 2022, the height of the pandemic, where we saw there was a huge investment by folks into rehabbing their homes or adding dollars to make their home a more livable space. Over 90% of those dollars distributed went to affluent white census tracts in the county. 90%, over 90%. So we don't, like, the infrastructure is getting supported in certain places for people to be homeowners. And you know what? It's a cycle that perpetuates itself. Those places where those dollars went already had high median home values. Those folks already had a lot of equity. Those folks already had a lot of dollars, so that they're able to then use money that they have to build even more equity, to send their kid to college, to take another loan out for, I mean, like, but the infrastructure is unevenly supported, and like people don't have the same access everywhere. And it's fundamentally at the heart of it, in some respect, and what the push should be is how to think about creating housing that is a home first and foremost, because thinking about it as a real estate investment actually sort of puts it in conflict with thinking about developing communities where everybody can thrive, and where we're really enabling life to flourish and not enabling life that's built on exploitation. And I think that's like fundamental to asking that infrastructure question. And really, I also think that if we're thinking about this from a community development standpoint and affordability, we really need to think about wages. Full-time workers need at least $22.51 an hour to just afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Ohio. That's from a study by the National Low Income Housing Coalition. 21% of jobs in the state of Ohio don't make that much money. 21%. And we know, and like, so if we're also trying to tackle this from a community development standpoint and thinking about the variety of infrastructure, we need to demand better wages for people. We can invest in people and in places, but we need both to happen. And part of that is people being able to have more dollars in their pocket, either through wages or something like universal basic income, or something like guaranteed income, to support folks. And to support folks also like that are living in the rental sphere. We can talk about rehab for homeowners, but we really also need to really focus on what rehab looks like in the multi-unit sphere, because there's plenty of people who are living in apartment complexes and rental units that are in subpar condition. And we have plenty of other places in the United States that show a commitment to making sure that there's basic standard human needs being met, and that every place is habitable to live in, that it's dry, warm. I'm not going to have, my son's not going to be exposed to lead or black mold or asbestos or radon. Those are things that I think, like, when we're talking about rehab, we really need to think too, or that it's basically accessible for everybody with any ability need that they have to enter into a place that they live and feel safe getting in or out of there. And I guess that's
thank you, Austin. I really appreciate that perspective. Yeah, and Molly, I know you wanted to jump in real quick, and then we're gonna toss it to Mike for kind of a little bit of a wrap up, and then we're gonna get to some of the questions that are in the chat. So go ahead, Molly.
So I think that a lot of the topics that we've covered here have implications, though, for what can be done. So, in many of the interviews and in working with the county, a lot of this also is what is within the purview of the county, right? So in thinking about what Tony's office has control over or where they can act. And so some of this is outside of the purview of the county, and even within our communities. There, as I said, there are 59 communities within Cuyahoga County. We talked about model legislation. That was one of the recommendations. Transit-oriented development is an example of that the county can put out model legislation, right? But they can't force a community to adopt it. They can create incentives or encouragement. And so it's also thinking about, in talking about a plan, like where you can act, where you have authority, where you have influence. And, some of this is beyond a housing issue, and goes towards more of our societal norms, expectations, and supports. I also do want to say that, there is a lot of information or, data that does not appear here. And I also want to make it clear that there's a reason why. And so, if you look back at the 2016 housing study, that was like 150 pages of data. In this instance, part of it was a request by the county to provide information that they could use to respond to federal grants, and that they could use to respond to requests for support and proposals and bringing money into the county. And it's reflective of what those RFPs and programs ask for. And so all of that that's missing is stuff that like our federal agencies and funders don't think is important. I mean, or, you know, at least from a request sort of for information standpoint, right? And so it's a really difficult position to be arguing for supports for that when the programs are asking for something that either doesn't include that, is not scored on that, isn't, right? And these are deeply rooted issues that this study or even a plan is not going to be able to fully address outside of the scope of the county. But, you know, I do also want to say we have to think about what is, I don't want to put Tony in a position here where the expectation is the county can do everything, because it can't. And not even from a funding standpoint, just from an influence and an authority standpoint. And it's going to require other actors, other partnerships. It's going to, you know, bringing in the economic development folks and actors around this. If you want to talk about increasing minimum wage and you know, businesses and other things like that, it's going to require a greater coalition. I'm going to end with that one of the last recommendations in the report was to create a advisory council for the county of the advocates, nonprofits, and housing experts that we do have here to continue on a regular, ongoing basis to inform the county. This was not meant to be the single and last voice in communicating to the county what should be done. And I sincerely hope that the county takes that recommendation to heart. It was brought up to us, and Mike, you mentioned it, that the foreclosure crisis, right? We saw the county really come together and bring the housing counseling agencies on a continuing, regular, right, ongoing basis. And it was expressed that there was a real need for that going forward. I think, Austin, that's where we can find some of these spaces of who can act where, you know, where can we communicate some of these is through that network of organizations that are so strong in our county. And we are really blessed to have that. Many other communities don't have what Cuyahoga County has.
Thank you, Molly. And to that point, I'm kind of going to ask Mike to kind of transition us to kind of some questions that we have from the chat or I've been receiving. And it kind of is very closely associated to the conversation that we're having. So the first question I want to ask is, was there a reason that, no, it's not necessarily, I guess this is to Director Scott, excuse me. Was there a reason that the housing needs of people with disabilities, including seniors, were not addressed by the study? Molly, you can answer this as well. And acknowledge that there's a serious shortage of accessible housing and county housing programs that really address those issues. As a whole. Can any of the panelists kind of speak to that?
Let me chime in briefly and I'll give it to Molly as the authority. I just want to point out, just because you may not see it doesn't mean it was part of the conversation, respectfully. So I was not a part of putting the study together, but as someone who's a veteran, as someone who's had family and friends that were impacted by physical and mental disability, as someone who is aging and or has an aging parent, those are issues that are near and dear to my heart, as I said when we started, the most vulnerable amongst us. So understand that ongoing conversations are going with the disabled community, the challenged community, both mental and physically, the aging community, as well as the veterans and those that are impacted by justice returning home from incarceration. So all of those, whether you see those groups flushed out explicitly or not, know that they're near and dear to my heart and a priority for me, as I mentioned, from an equitable standpoint. So those are not communities that are going to be excluded. So to the study, I'll defer to Molly though.
For the project and the undertaking of this work, we did interview 12 representatives and staff from various county agencies and departments that included Veterans Affairs, Health and Human Services departments. And so there was I think that a lot of the issues related to things like home maintenance and rehab and repair fall under those. But I will also say that, we asked the question, what are the leading challenges? What should the county be looking at? What should be their focus? Where do you think there's opportunity? All of the interviews were recorded and transcribed and analyzed through a software analysis of coding and what words popped up. And I will say, if very specifically disability had floated to the top, we would have included that very clearly. Now it's enveloped in all the other things. When we had our one-on-one with county staff in briefing them on the report, discussions about what was talked about, relating information in the interviews from the county agencies, that was certainly discussed. But though that specifically was not brought up by everyone we interviewed enough to float significantly to the top.
Okay.
And I can't tell you why that is. It was mentioned in spotty interviews and conversations. So we reflected what was told to us.
That's fair.
Which,
And Mike, I know, Austin, you came off. Let me get Mike in here and
Yeah.
I hold that thought
Get Mike in
because I
there.
know you're coming from the perspective of obviously being the vice president of Ben Rose and the co-chair of Cuyahoga Livability. Can you provide some insight on what you think about what's missing or how we can maybe address those issues?
yeah, I just think it's missing and might, as an advisory group comes together, I think you could make a subcommittee on that and start to address it. I think the thing that we need to be mindful of is, I think nationally, I don't know, right off the top of my head, I don't know what the housing shortage is in units in the county. Austin, you might know that. But nationally, I know it's 750,000. So we take that, and we take that the fastest growing segment of the population in, at least in Ohio, but it's national. We know it's national, are older adults. We already have a housing age issue and stock issue. That has to be part of the conversation for older adults, as well as things like universal design and access. I mean, Molly pointed it out earlier. We have so many houses, particularly on the east side, that just have bathrooms on the upstairs. And when someone falls, that's a game changer. I mean, and that's the other thing too, I would point out, Keisha, is tying all of my colleagues' comments together, we have incredible resources in Cuyahoga County. We have incredible brains, access to knowledge and information on this experience. But this is a different era than the foreclosure crisis. Let's be very clear about that. Resources were coming every which way to get right, because there were business implications for banks, for insurance companies. So money was just flowing. Right now, I'm looking at HUD getting cut 50%, not just a shutdown, but as of December 9th, they're going to be down to 2,000 employees. So we're losing resources. So it goes back to Molly's comment about what's within the county's purview. And I can tell you every housing coalition is focused on that. What do we have? What do we have that we can control ourselves? And then the other thing where I think we've been notoriously bad historically is we talk a lot about the prospective homeowner having some skin in the game. The very least we can do, at Benjamin Rose, we talk a lot about our first order of business is to get somebody out of crisis. And that is, but then it's followed with trying to help them become more capable by giving them knowledge, education, skills through counseling, and access to resources like through our bank partners, down payment assistance or a secured card. So I think we're going to have to be more autonomous and independent, coupled with advocacy for state and federal levels. One of the last thing I'm going to say, Keisha, and then I'm going to throw it back to you, is one of the coalitions I sit on is Thriving Cleveland. I think I saw Marianne is actually here today, and we benchmark other cities for what they're doing. And it's important to realize that there are definitely some common themes across cities, and they're doing some innovative things, particularly preventive things. And that's where I think coupling counseling with anything that we're able to give to people is always a good thing to help them become more autonomous and independent. But we have to be mindful of, we have incredible resources here. And I think we need to utilize and mobilize those first. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Keisha.
Yeah, and so Austin, I want you to kind of chime in here
Yeah.
about this idea, and then we're going to kind of get to a little bit of a wrap up with
Yeah.
one question for each panel. So go ahead.
Great. Yeah, I'm going to put on my fair housing cap now. I think, the report illustrates that most of the county's housing stock was built without even minimal accessibility features. And it predates the implementation of the Fair Housing Act accessibility guidelines. The county, as a low-hanging fruit, could incentivize that those Fair Housing Act accessibility guidelines are followed by every new build, but also as a part of anybody who receives dollars from the county to do housing work could be made to make sure that they are compliant with them, to ensure that there's universal design that is met at the bare minimum. The other aspect of accessibility in the ADA kind of sphere, and also from a reentry perspective and from just kind of a mental health needs perspective, is zoning for group homes. This is something that in the State of Fair Housing, a report that I've authored over the last 3 years now at the Fair Housing Center, which was accessible for doing this analysis, illustrates that there are a number of municipalities within the county that have zoning guidelines and guidelines around who can access group homes that are extremely burdensome and create an inability to actually produce enough housing that is accessible for a variety of people with a variety of needs. And that's something that the county could also look at and go, hey, is this having a disparate impact? And can we ensure that fair housing rights for the folks and make sure that those are fully enacted and followed, and try to figure out how to work in coalition across the number of municipalities that are cited in that report that have some pretty burdensome zoning ordinances to incentivize changing them so that we can create greater access to homes for people with a variety of accessibility needs. I think that's been cited in that report well before I was writing it, and will probably continue whether or not I'm writing it or not, because those issues are in the codified ordinances themselves, and those things can be changed and need to be changed, honestly. And is a recommendation that the Fair Housing Center has put out annually as an issue to be addressed. I think too, right, the report illustrates that there's a housing crisis, but that crisis isn't new. That actually crisis, working class folks, Black folks, Latinx folks, Indigenous folks, that's the everyday of housing in the United States. In 1976, 100 Cleveland residents went to the federal government with pieces of their dilapidated homes to be part of a larger movement to build they occupied a federal building and built a shelter out of their broken homes that they got federal grants to become homeowners, and were put into homes that were in dilapidated stances and states, and then got stuck on mortgage terms that were utterly untenable for them. And what I'm just trying to say is that the report is illustrating something that is always already here and is disproportionately already something that the most vulnerable and oppressed communities experience in accessing housing and accessing housing stability. And the paradigm shift needs to go, we can't allow, the political will, about whether resources or not, the political will has to be, we don't want this anymore. We want to make sure that everybody's housed, everybody deserves a right to be housed, and every place that people live is habitable, safe, and opens up opportunity for them. I think that's what the opportunity is here too. The federal government rescinding some of its stuff, yes, those resources are key and important to think about how we're going to maneuver around them. But it also offers an opportunity for us to do innovative stuff on the ground and be a leader in the nation, to go forward even without the federal government being involved, to go, we can do something better, and we can work together and collaboratively, and also use people power It's like housing isn't just a technocratic thing to figure out. It isn't just like when we all too often, even as somebody who is a quote unquote expert, we need to rescind our expertise and listen to the most impacted, because they have ideas too, and they have desires for their communities and what they want to construct. And I think that's like the other opportunity from this study is like, let's do that same thing and let's listen to people on the ground and create a housing plan that, you know, really centers just, you know, social justice and equitable outcomes, which I hear, you know, Director Scott, you're saying, yes, equity, equity, equity. We should stand by that, even in times where that seems to be a headwind in even saying that word. So I really applaud that.
And I know Director Scott, you have your hand up. If you could give us maybe your comment in 30 seconds, and we'll begin to kind of wrap up.
You know, I'll be brief. I wanted to thank Austin for his comments, but I'm gonna jump in and we know a lot of this, right? We know a lot of this, particularly as a man of color, born in Cleveland, raised in East Cleveland, first generation college. I've lived these truths, but I want to go officially on record that I appreciate the work of Molly and her team, because as I led off with, what that now presents is there's people that don't know this common sense. There are people that this now gives me the data to push some agendas ahead, because I'm a qualitative more than a quantitative person. So Molly, thank you to your team for giving me a baseline for a resource. And as it pertains to a plan, I do look to have some conversations in Q1 of 2026 with a broad range of stakeholders, kind of an open forum to talk about some things that I'm working on and to get some feedback. So thank you.
And thank you to all of our panelists. I mean, this was a very good discussion. I think we kind of are on the diving board, the springboard to actually getting something done, right? You know, we're talking about obviously the challenges, how we got here, the challenges, recommendations, but, you know, just like I said earlier, we need to, you know, we're looking forward to those conversations, Director Scott, in first quarter, but I'm also looking forward to second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter about doing something. And to Austin's comments and things like that, you know, we really have a breadth of resources here in the county, and we need to get about it, because you know, with the current administration and with things going the way they are on the federal level, we need to invest in our people locally and regionally, and I think this is a great starting point. So with that, I would like to thank our panelists and kick things back to Frank Ford. Thank you.
Okay, well, without making too many thank yous, I'm going to again thank the moderator, the panelists, and everybody who participated today, and all of you who put in questions and comments in the chat. Those are, I believe, going to be recorded and maintained. As I mentioned at the beginning of the forum, a link to the video of today's event will be sent to all of you. And with that, thank you again, and we are adjourned.